Welcome to Gone to Texas, a podcast about AMC's Preacher. My name is Alex, and I have not read any of Garth Ennis's Preacher.
And I am Nick, and I have read all of Garth Ennis's Preacher.
Today we're going to be discussing the pilot of the show, and while we will not be spoiling any of the comic, and by extension the future plot lines of the show, we will be discussing the details of the pilot. So pause this and go watch the show before you listen to the rest of the episode. But you can find more from us at g2tpodcast.com. That's the letter G, number 2, letter T, podcast.com. You can write us feedback to g2tfeedback@gmail.com. And then our Twitter is g2tpodcast as well. So talk with us. Let us know what you think of the show and what you think of our show and the show Preacher as well. And let us know if we missed anything or if you want us to touch on something more. And we would love to hear your thoughts. So I think we'll get right down to it. We're hoping that these shows will be 45 minutes to an hour long at most. This one might be a little longer than we're anticipating because of the longer episode. It was 90 minutes. But on with the show. So we're opening on outer space. It looks like a 70s educational film showing some kind of celestial body hurtling throughout the solar system. It hits an African preacher, and then he explodes. And then we get to meet our protagonist, Jesse. He gets ready for the day. We see that he has flashbacks about his preacher father. And he goes on to do not a very rousing sermon to his congregation. And they go to a barbecue outside where a young kid pleads for Jesse to help him with his abusive father. So, Nick, you were thrown off by the lo-fi space thing at the front of the episode. What did you think of that?
I don't know what I thought of it. It was it was interesting, I guess. With that said, I don't know. I don't know what that means or what it must. I don't know if it was just a stylistic choice that was meant to be interesting. I don't know. I don't know if it has any greater meaning. Yeah,
it just seemed to me like a stylistic flair of It wasn't what I was expecting the first shot of the show to be at all.
Yeah.
And we both kind of commented on the large titles taking up the screen like a Wes Anderson movie.
That's hot right now.
Yeah. So
big words are hot.
We also got to see kind of the dynamic of Jesse in his church. He's not very good at his job. Did this opening, how did you feel about this opening compared to the comic? Did it feel... It wasn't shot for shot, I presume. Yeah.
Not at all. No. The first issue of the comic is actually... It starts with Jesse and Cassidy and Tulip already all acquainted and sitting in a diner.
Okay.
And rehashing the events of the last 36 hours or something like that.
Interesting.
So it's already totally different. I mean, not totally different, but it is.
We could eventually get to them in that diner. That could be.
We could.
That could be episode 3 or 4.
Which is interesting because I kind of I'm always a sucker for that kind of mixed up chronology, like a nonlinear story.
Yeah.
So when the first issue started, I actually tried to read Preacher one other time before I actually read it. Not that that's a ton of times, but. It's not like 8 times I've been taught how to play euchre and I still don't get it. But the first issue of Preacher was it's just so oddly structured. It just drops you right in the middle of it. And I must have been reading it at the wrong time, just late at night or something. And I couldn't get into it. I finished the first issue, I think, and then I just never read anymore.
Yeah.
And then when I finally went to read it, it was actually really perfect conditions because I was traveling and I was actually in the desert at the time. And, something about it just totally clicked, and it was the perfect time for me to be reading it, and it was just phenomenal. But the way the book starts is very different, and it's I would say it's actually more arresting because you're thrown right into these characters and you don't really know their relationship, but they all seem really comfortable with each other, and all 3 of them are so different that you're very you just wonder how these people know each other and how they ever got to meet, and then you kind of start to learn a little bit more. So, in the show is a much more typical boilerplate pilot approach where it's very straightforward,
introducing you to everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a little different.
Yeah. We should also note this is the first scene we meet the annoying man who the actor who plays him is in everything.
He is.
So Annoying Man will be more important later. We'll get back to that.
Is that what he's credited as, Annoying Man?
No, that's just what I wrote him down
That's
as.
fine.
I'm going off of my notes here.
Yeah,
so.
I know he's in a lot of other. He's probably in Parks and Rec, and he's probably in like Veep and that kind of stuff. He's totally that guy, one of those guys. But he's almost distracting in this. Like as soon as he's there, I'm just like, oh, it's that guy.
Yeah,
and
that's kind of the problem with him. It's weird because it's like we don't even know his name, so we can't really.
Yeah, with people like that, at like character actors like that in general, when they start to show up and too much, you're kind of like, oh, it's that guy again, and it kind of pulls you out.
His name is Brian Husky.
Brian Husky.
He is credited as Ted Ryerson.
Is he really?
Like Ned Ryerson.
That's awesome.
That's really, really cool.
That's good. It all swings around to Tobolowsky.
Yep. Good friend Tobolowsky. So we can move on to the second act. We've got basically Jesse down at a town hall meeting where the new mascot of the city is being shown off and being beaten, and the mayor is pretty much being beaten as well. We get our introduction to Cassidy. He's on a plane, and we learn that he's a vampire very quickly.
Yep.
The first action sequence of the show. Jesse's at a diner with an organist after that, with his organist at the church, and Annoying Man, Ted Ryerson is back, complaining about his mother, and we kind of learn that the mayor has a thing for the organist, but the organist doesn't really want the mayor. And then finally, we end up back at Africa to see a military vehicle roll up, and two men in safari gear come out to check the priest explosion site. So, you kind of had a reaction about the priest explosion site, guys, because you thought it was going to be somebody, but it wasn't. So I don't want to touch on any spoilers from that respect. But so you're saying these guys are reminding you of a force that is potentially going to enter the show.
Initially, I thought that one of the guys was one character, and now I'm pretty sure I know who they are.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I know who they're supposed to be anyway.
Okay.
But I don't know for sure, so we'll have to.
We can check back in on
tuned
that
to find out.
Yeah. In terms of Cassidy, you said Cassidy was perfectly cast.
Yeah, so far. Well, yes. Here's the thing. That role. Well, for people who have read the book, they know obviously a lot more about the character, and Cassidy is a really interesting character. He has way more depth than you would think, and I don't know if that's a spoiler or not, because I certainly didn't expect it. And then when he starts to finally develop more and you learn more about him, it's really good. You're like, wow, this is actually a really great character. The thing about casting of him, it's really easy to say like, oh, the Psycho character is great. Like they're well cast. And this is an unpopular opinion that I have, but it's like Heath Ledger as the Joker. Like he's really good. That's undeniable. But he had the easy job. Like just be crazy. Play the crazy guy.
The character's written.
Yes, exactly. You just have to step in and throw in some weird ticks and some weird quirks. And whether obviously that's where the skill of that actor and director pairing works, or say, how about I try this? How about I lick my lips a lot? And that kind of thing. And say, oh, that's great. But once the cameras are rolling, you've got it. Just be crazy. And the director will guide you. He'll say, okay, you need to bring it down a little bit, or you need to bring it up a little bit more. Playing the over-the-top crazy guy, I think, is a lot easier than playing the more nuanced villains. That's an unpopular opinion, so feel free to write in and disagree if you want. But I think that that's just kind of the way those characters are. And I know at the time that I was first hotly debating this with somebody, I had way more examples from other movies.
Yeah.
But now I don't. But anyway, that's not what this show's about. So I think Cassidy, on the surface, could have been a very easy character to cast and play. Just say, get someone who can do Irish and is on the scrawny side, and just make him crazy. But already right off the bat, Joseph Gilgun, I think is his name.
Yeah, I think that
plays
correct.
Cassidy. He's already showing little signs of the Cassidy that is to come, and a little bit more of the character that's lurking beneath the surface, and that's great. He's totally got the Cassidy just obnoxious swagger down, where he doesn't care. Literally, he might not even know where he is, and he doesn't care. Like he'll be fine with whatever situation is going on, and I think that's awesome. And his resourcefulness is already on display, which is really cool, because he is a drunken kind of just oaf, kind of a fool, but he's also really crafty and really smart. And obviously the thing with vampires and characters like that is that, you don't know how long they've been around. You don't know how much stuff they know. It's easy to discredit them and be like, whatever, just put a stake through him and he's done. But that guy's been alive for, say, 500 years. He probably knows how to dodge a stake or two and do a few other tricks too.
Or jump out of a plane
Right.
with a bottle of blood.
And I loved that. Yeah, I loved that he was sure to grab a snack for the road and to help himself recover when he gets down. And then the umbrella too was a really nice touch. I was like, okay, this is really cool. Because he displays that throughout the book where he knows he needs blood to get better if he hurts himself, and he knows he needs shade. And he really won't go anywhere without knowing what one of those two things is going to be. So it's pretty sweet. They did a great job of laying everything about him right on the line, right out in his first scene. And so to introduce a character so wholly in one scene, also to have a really kick-ass action scene, that's great. Like that's a great.
So you like the action?
I loved it. I thought it was really good. Like TV action, I'm always a little skeptical. I mean, hell, these days movie action, I'm even a little skeptical. But this was really well done. I thought it was really fun to watch. It was pretty exciting. It all felt really real. I was like, okay, I don't feel like that's a total stand-in stunt guy. Like it feels like they're actually shooting this in a way. It reminded me a little bit of Edgar Wright's action. It's got a little bit of that kinetic vibe to it, but there's still like somewhat longer unbroken shots just following action around. It was really cool.
I was a little bit iffy on it because it felt a little bit it felt like the choreography was a little obvious. Not so much in the way of like a video game where they keep sending one guy, or like movies where they keep sending the one guy in the group to go fight it wasn't that level. He was actually holding his own, but it just kind of felt like it felt like a pilot fight scene to me. I did appreciate that they didn't cover that up by just violently shaking the camera.
Right.
So that was good. There is some shake to it, but it gives that kinetic feeling.
I do remember thinking there was one. It was like a grapple or a punch that felt a little like the actor waited a beat for the other actor to be in position. But I was like, yeah, whatever. I would rather see that than like a ton of CG,
absolutely,
or a ton of cuts, or a ton of shaky cam. Yeah, because I could see like, okay, they shot it, they did 10 takes, and they're like, we got it in there somewhere. Let's go home and get ready for the next day of shooting. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
I'll note that I kind of like, it's not a match on action, but it's kind of a match on action of Cassidy jumping out and then the splat of ketchup on, on the plate. That was fun.
It was cool.
So, all right, on to Act 3. Jesse goes in to check on a man named Walter that we kind of heard from the sheriff earlier in the episode, but he finds out that there's a woman in the home, and he quickly egresses saying, "Thanks for the warning, Walter." And then we go a little bit back in time, Kansas not too long ago, I think is what it says. Mm-hmm. Basically, there's a badass woman fighting people off as she's driving a car, and she ends up having to make a homemade bazooka with some kids to take on more people that are coming after her. And we learn that is Tulip.
Yep.
I want to say Ruth Negga Negga, I don't know how to say her last name, is the actress playing Tulip, and she was in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I didn't really care for her at all there, but I feel like here she actually has like a interesting and developed character to play, and so I'm kind of excited to see more from her. But what did you think of the characterization of Tulip?
No, I'm just thinking. I think she's pretty good.
Yeah.
She definitely feels different already.
Okay.
But I think the core quality of Tulip, that she's fed up with Jesse's shit, is pretty intact. So that's good. No, I think she's very interesting. Like she looks very interesting. She's a very interesting build. She has an interesting face.
She's got very interesting fashion too.
Yeah.
She's wearing weird clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, she's interesting to watch, and so I think that's pretty cool because it's a good way to make her stand out. Like the cast, when I saw who they cast, I was like, she's just unusual looking.
Yeah,
and it was interesting that they cast a black woman as the role, because the book is like in the Deep South for a lot of it, all over the Deep South. And it deals with a lot of racism.
Yeah.
So that could potentially be really cool.
That'll give them the source to let her.
I don't mean cool.
Own.
It's not.
Racism is not cool.
No, correct. But it could lead to some really interesting exploration of that kind of stuff, because they do get into some of that in the books, especially in like with Jesse. We'll have to talk about Jesse later on, but with the show taking place when it takes place, I assume it takes place in 2016. I mean, it pretty much does. So yeah, more to come on that, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah, her introduction was cool. All the writing between her and the kids was really good, and it all felt really natural. The kids were good.
Mm-hmm.
She played off of them really well. The not showing what was happening and just showing the aftermath is really cool.
Yeah.
It's it's nice when TV. And I have no idea what the budget is on this, but I can't imagine it's enough to show someone shooting down a helicopter with a homemade bazooka.
Yeah.
But that way of doing it is much more fun to watch, I think, and just entertaining. Just listen and watch the reaction of the kids.
It's a clever way to get around that budget limitation. So it's cool that they did that a lot in the first season of Game of Thrones as well.
Sure, yeah.
But
it's also, I was listening to an episode of The Canon which is another podcast we've talked about before. If you don't know what it is, look it up. It's really good.
Yep.
And there's an episode where they're talking about Blade Runner, and but there's a scene where they're talking about. I guess it's actually kind of a major spoiler for Blade Runner. They talk about when Roy Batty catches up to, oh God, why am I blanking on his name now? The man who created all the replicants, Tyrell.
Yeah,
Tyrell. He catches up to Tyrell and he's talking to him, and then he proceeds to like just kill him by gouging his eyes with his thumbs. And they were both kind of like talking about how they didn't really like that scene, and like it's just pretty kind of gross, but not really well done. And they talked about how the editing was really just cut between like all the people in the room like really rapidly. And they pointed out that, and they praise Spielberg all the time, which is really cool because a lot of times you hear people going like, "Oh, Spielberg is so boring," and like, guys, Spielberg's like, he's the master, and just accept it because it's true. They talk about how a director like Spielberg would make that part more intense by showing the going in for the thumb gouge and then showing the reaction of the character who betrayed him, J.F. Sebastian, by showing the look of horror on his face and like maybe the shadows on the wall. That kind of thing would be so much more grisly and intense. Leave it to your imagination. So when shows, or either movies can do things like this, like with that scene, I think it just intensifies what
limitation often breeds creativity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right. One last thing I wanted to say: they did sneak in some overt feminism with the boy asking Tulip if she had a boyfriend to come take care of all this situation, and I was kind of like, it kind of soured me a little bit. That I was like, a little boy would ask that. I don't know if that girl would have the same reaction.
Oh, that's what bothered you, was that somebody asked the question?
Yeah, because it just kind of seemed like it seemed very on the nose. But then I was like, if I was a little kid and I grew up with a strong father figure that was like taking care of things, although maybe he doesn't have a strong father, I don't know. There's a lot of implication going on there. But,
yeah, and I think part of it's kind of regional too. Like,
yeah.
Again, I don't want to say I don't want to make any broad generalizations about like where in the world you are, but feel free to make them about us in the Midwest, I guess. But we're reviewing a show called Preachers. So what does that say?
Yep.
But I think that's a pretty reasonable question. And I really liked the little girl, like her reply. Yeah, that was good.
I liked it. I didn't know it felt almost like an adult writing for the kid, but
I liked Tulip's reaction too. It was really good.
Yeah. All right. So that's the end of Act 3. On to Act 4. We open on another flashback Jesse is having with his father. He promised his father something, and his father was shot right in front of him. But then we see Jesse walk up to Quincannon. Do you know the name of the company?
Quincannon Meat and it said something else too.
Some kind of butchery.
I don't think it's called that in the comic.
Okay.
But anyway.
But he's there to help with or at least kind of try to talk to the young man's mother who came to him in the first segment of the show.
Correct.
To kind of see if the father was actually beating her. So he has a discussion with her about that and finds out that she actually likes being the pain, or supposedly she says she does. We also get to see the aftermath of Cassidy jumping out of the plane as a pile of intestines on the ground.
That's so gross.
And he ends up, a cow approaches him, and that's how he's able to kind of rejuvenate himself as he drinks the blood of the cow. And then we cut to Russia as well, seeing some police on the street, and they kind of walk into a cathedral of some kind, and it turns out that another religious man has exploded. So... yeah, so a lot of this is kind of transitory going on to the rest of the episode. That you said it, that depiction of Cassidy was pretty gross.
Yeah.
But does that feel like something that would fit in the comic?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's way worse to come if they stick with the tone of the book.
Yeah. So that's fair. we get a lot more about Jesse's flashback later on in the episode, so we can talk about that when that comes. And then so I think we can just move on to the next act.
Quincannon is pretty important.
That name sounds awesome. Like, I saw that name on the Wikipedia article, and I was like, man, what a name.
Yeah,
but
Quincannon, I don't know what shape it'll take in the show.
Okay.
But it's actually an element that's introduced way late in the comics. I want to say like probably in like the issue like in the 40s range, 40s or even a little bit upper 40s. So it's seeing that right off the bat. I was like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Either it's just foreshadowing or maybe it's just an Easter egg and they're never going to get around to it.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. That's the end of Act 4. Act 5, we get to see Jesse interact with Tulip after he ran out on her earlier in the episode. She's trying to convince him to join her for a job. We don't know what the job is, but she's also heard that Jesse's really bad at preaching. So Jesse also drops by to visit somebody named Eugene, as the sheriff wanted him to. And it turns out it's the sheriff's son. This is the character traditionally known as Arseface.
It is. I'm sure he'll be known as that within an episode or two.
Yeah. So basically, Arseface was concerned about God holding grudges against him, but Jesse kind of comforts him. And I thought it was interesting that Arseface is subtitled in the show.
Yes, he is in the book also.
Okay, that's funny. And then, so all that stuff. Is there anything in particular that you want to touch on there?
That was actually probably my favorite scene of the episode.
Jesse,
which is interesting because I really don't like Arseface in the comic. Arseface in the comic is way grosser. Like he's pretty gross in the show, but like kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
But like in the show, well, in the show, he's you can look at him and just kind of be like, wow.
It's off-putting, but it's kind of like...
It's off-putting, but it's not revolting.
Yeah.
Like I've actually, I don't think it's that bad. In the books though, it's like routinely characters see him and they like turn their heads and like throw up, and like he's way more. He's got like a big thing of drool coming out of his little hole for a mouth, and his hair's really gross and his eyes are all weird. He's way gnarlier in the book, and all of his actual speech bubbles are just like just like M's.
Yeah,
and then there's like little dialogue boxes at the bottom that explain what he's saying most
like
of the time.
Footnote kind of thing.
Yeah. But that scene was really great, and I think it was actually pretty much the core of what Preacher's about, kind of. And in a way, without saying anything further, Arseface has kind of touched on the whole impetus of like what is going on.
Okay.
So it's really, I thought that was really interesting. They took the character that's like, he's pretty useless in the comic. Like he starts off being kind of important, and then he like disappears, and then he just pops up sporadically. And every time I got to like parts with Arseface, I was kind of like, okay. But then I got to like an issue that's entirely Arseface, like midway through, and I was like, oh god, I should just skip this. So the fact that they're turning him into an actual character is pretty cool, and the kid who's playing him is like really good, I think, so far. So that's great. I mean, that was one of the things going into the show. I was kind of like, oh god, Arseface is in the pilot, but that is pretty good.
Yeah, that's Ian Coletti playing Arseface. So
I have no idea who that is, but
me neither. And then finally in that act, we cut to a bar where Jesse is drinking. Cassidy walks in as well. We see that Tom Cruise has died by a spontaneous explosion at a Scientology center.
That's funny.
Just kind of going along with the theme of religious figures dying.
Exploding.
So Donnie, the aforementioned husband who beats his wife, shows up saying that he knows who the snitch that clued Jesse into his hurting his wife is, and then they go ahead to fight, pretty much, to get another fight here. We get to see Jesse lay the smackdown, even though he's a preacher. Mm-hmm. So he knows how to fight somehow.
We also get some mysterious Cassidy phone interaction. He's on the phone with somebody saying that they found him. He doesn't know how, and then asking for money before the phone gets hung up on him. Yeah. Which I thought was really interesting.
So he was speaking about the people on the plane. That was something that I forgot to touch on. The people on the plane were trying to find Cassidy for some reason. Mm-hmm. And then Cassidy proceeded to kill them all. So that was him phoning home to somebody. But basically, the sheriff tries to stop the fight, but Jesse basically just breaks Donnie's arm and ends the fight right there.
Snaps his arm.
Yeah, it's like a compound fracture. That bone comes through the skin.
That's pretty sweet.
So yeah, I liked that fight. I liked it more, and maybe maybe some of the darkness of the bar and everything helped to hide things a little bit more. But
I really liked that fight.
Yeah.
That was awesome. That's what I was waiting for. It's like right off the bat in the comics, Jesse's just really angry. He's just a super angry dude. He's kind of a little less apathetic. Like this Jesse's definitely a little more just like exhausted and seems just kind of like bored and uninspired. And but as soon as you meet him in the books, he's like in a bar fight and he's just like pissed at like the town for not caring about anything or doing anything right. So it was cool to see that side finally come out and that little grin on his face for a half beat as the first dude he takes down, he kind of has this moment of just like, oh man,
feels good.
Yeah.
All right. Act 6, we've got Preacher and Cassidy locked up in prison. Jesse reveals that he's broken a promise many times over. We presume it's probably the promise he's been flashing back to with his dad. Mm-hmm. We get a little bit more on Cassidy as well. That's kind of their actual meeting at that point. Jesse gets driven home by the organist of his church. I wish I knew her name, but I don't. He tells her that he's quitting, and she gets very angry about it. And then Jesse starts walking up to the church. The church is kind of glowing, and the doors are opening and closing in the wind. The power won't turn on. Jesse walks to the altar, sits in a pew, and prays aloud for God to respond, and doesn't get any kind of response. But the doors drift open, and a clear spirit-like force heads for Jesse, kind of pushing pews away as it heads towards Jesse. And then it hits him and flings him towards the altar. So this, we presume, is the same thing that's been exploding other priests. And this is my assumption. I don't know anything here, but this thing is exploding priests, and it kind of violently came at the first guy that we saw, but it kind of approaches Jesse in a little bit more of a metered manner than the other people, it seems. Mm-hmm. So, any thoughts on that? I mean, I don't want. It feels like a loaded subject because there's a lot for you to talk around here because we don't know much about what that all is as of yet. So
it is interesting because it feels like they didn't really show the thing.
Yeah,
the thing has a name in the book, what it's called, but I guess I don't know if they'll ever get around to that in the show, but. It definitely, the way it kind of slowly approached him, it was like it knew, like it was choosing him, which is really interesting.
It don't like that's kind of the thing that you get from the show, especially taking this moment into account, is that this spiritual body or whatever it is has been trying to find a host.
Correct.
And the people who exploded could not handle it.
Yep.
And so
yeah, it was interesting because in the book it's much more like it feels a lot more random. Like it does go around the world, and it does find a bunch of failed hosts, and then just rockets into Jesse without any sort of calm approach like that. But that moment is very different than it is in the books, that's for sure. But it was kind of cool. I liked kind of that moment. It was weird that they. It definitely has a look in the book, and in the show, it's kind of this clear, like shimmery thing, which
like
is kind
a
of
ghost
interesting.
almost.
Yeah. But it was neat to see it interacting, like pushing the pews. That was cool.
Yeah.
It was pretty neat.
All right. And then on to what I believe is the final act of the show. We finally get, I mean, it's not all of the flashback, but we get back to Jesse's flashback, and there's a quote from his dad and him saying, "Got to be one of the good guys because there's way too many of the bad." Mm-hmm. The father also says, "We Custers don't cry, we fight," and he gets shot. So the promise is to be one of the good guys. We kind of assume, or at least that's what I assumed. And then Jesse wakes up after being out for 3 days with his organist by his side. It's Sunday, so it's time for church. Jesse walks to church and runs into Ted Ryerson. Was it Ryerson?
Ted Ryerson.
Yeah. Ted Ryerson again. And Jesse gets fed up and basically tells him to be brave, tell the truth, and open your heart for the third or fourth time in the episode. And the man actually takes it to heart and runs away to go take care of the issue, it seems. We get a really bad Amazing Grace rendition in church. Mm-hmm. Tulip walks into the church to kind of attend and see what Jesse's doing. Jesse announces he's apologizing for being a bad preacher, and then he kind of realizes in the middle of his speech that he can't quit. And we kind of, some of that anger that you were talking about starts to seep in that speech too. So that's kind of good to know that it's kind of moving back to that characterization. And that speech kind of cuts back with Ted traversing to his mother's nursing home to talk to her about the issues, but he basically just takes a knife and literally opens his heart by cutting it out and handing it to her. So Jesse's kind of got the ability to like command people to go do things, but it's very literal, it seems. And then final shot of the show, our final sequence of the show, mysterious man eats a tea bag in the car, and then another mysterious man walks up to him in the car, says, "It's here," and they walk up to the All Saints congregation sign. Presumably those are the same two guys that went to Africa and Russia as well. So they've been kind of following these priest explosions. So, a lot to talk about there. We get to see Jesse, the first kind of depiction of Jesse's powers.
Mm-hmm.
And you were kind of prepared for that one. You're like, oh, this isn't going to go well.
Yeah, no.
But
it's great. I liked it.
Yeah, and you said you were kind of sad that Jesse's eyes didn't glow red like they do in the comic.
Yeah, I love that detail. It's just cool. Like, I assume that they might not do anything further than what they've already done, but it's just a clever way in the book to let you know when he's, because he knows when he's doing it in the comic. Like he knows, like, so he can tell you something, but he won't necessarily be using the power.
Yeah.
So the red in the eyes was a clever way of letting you know that he knows right now he's making a decision to totally mess with somebody, but to possibly kill them. And so I kind of like that. Obviously, at this point in the show, he isn't aware of what he's doing. Yeah.
So we'll more on that soon. Mm-hmm. And it seems like these guys are going to have some kind of interaction with Jesse, the mysterious dudes traversing the world. Mm-hmm. We'll presumably talk with him next episode, maybe.
Hope so.
That's what it seems like. So, yeah. Is there anything else in that kind of end part that you want to talk about before we get into general thoughts? Weird to go backwards like that, but...
No, I don't think so. I think that about covers it. It was a cool way to see all the characters of the episode were in one place. Like even Cassidy was sitting in the back row.
It's like the pilot of Modern Family.
Yeah, they all just wind up in one location. Yeah, that was interesting. That was cool, and it was a nice moment of seeing Jesse kind of change his mind. Mm-hmm. But where that's going to go, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Overall thoughts on the pilot? Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy it more than you thought you would?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know yet.
Still thinking
because
on it?
The thing is, I didn't particularly love the trailer.
Yeah,
but
which people will have heard in our primer episode if they go back and listen. But
I started seeing some of the posters, and they were like aping certain covers from the series, and I got really excited. But the fact that it's even being made got me excited. Like, of course, I was excited for this episode. I wasn't like dreading it. And I think it's cool that it's getting made. I think it did a lot of things really, really well. I can say for certain that it's already going to deviate from the comics, like in terms of the plot and like what's going on. I wish this show was already all out so I could just keep watching it, because I'm going to be really impatient with this show, because the books, the plot is so strong. It's just the strongest current. It just keeps flowing. It gets a little bogged down later on in the series, but it's for the first, like, I want to say like 25 or 30 issues, it's perfect. Like, it does not let up, and you are absolutely entirely enthralled the entire time. You are so curious to know where it's going, and I just couldn't put it down. And the show, I think I can kind of already see what the first season's going to be, and I don't really like it where it's going.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and that it's going to be fun to watch where the series goes. I do think it's a pretty promising pilot. I think it introduces everybody for the most part. I'm still not 100% sold on Dominic Cooper.
Okay.
I like him, and it's just, I think it's because it's a different characterization of Jesse. Because as soon as I finished reading the book, I was like, okay, that's it. Either John Bernthal or Matthew McConaughey has to play Jesse. Yeah. Like, has to. Because they both kind of look like him. And they're both like, they got that Texas vibe. They can do that Texas really well.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could see them, either of them, like giving a sermon and then going out and like cracking a beer and throwing a steak on the grill and just like punching someone. Like both of those guys characterize that so well. And Dominic Cooper's a little softer than that.
Yeah.
Which is funny because he's a really good actor. He plays a really good guy and he plays a really good bad guy.
Yeah.
See Need for Speed. He's such a great bad guy in that. And he's so over the top. But I do like him. I think he's good. It's just a very different Jesse. He's a little more, I don't know how to put it yet. He's just not, he just doesn't look like a piece of, he doesn't have Dylan face, as it's called, where men...
We discussed Dylan face in the primer. So.
Men in comics who are drawn by Steve Dillon all have a similar face. And John Bernthal...
See John Bernthal.
He is living Dylan face. Like, if you could probably even Google, like, Steve Dillon face, or Steve Dillon face, and it'll be there. They all have the same kind of facial features, and it's hilarious, because no one on Earth really looks like it except for John Bernthal. And so... I remember when I was reading it like a little over a year ago, I was like, God, he looks like John Bernthal. And then like they ended up casting the Punisher, who was really famously drawn by Steve Dillon. And I was like, okay, well, they're half right.
They got it.
It's funny because as I was watching this episode, I was like, you know what? I would almost be willing to give up John Bernthal as the Punisher in order to see him as Jesse.
Oh,
which is a huge claim
really
right now, because he's really good as the Punisher. But we'll see.
Maybe
Dominic Cooper's got
Cooper
time.
Could grow into his we got some time to go.
And I think that's probably the part of it, because the Jesse in the books, like you just look at him and you're like, you wouldn't mess with that guy. Like he just is a tough, mean-looking son of a bitch. And I think maybe that's kind of part of the casting, because Dominic Cooper does have like kind of a soft face, kind of soft features, and so he seems a little less scary. Because it was kind of like the thing with Jack Reacher. When Jack Reacher was coming out, anybody who had read the books was like, oh, what?
Yeah.
Jack Reacher's supposed to be like 6'4" and blonde. He's supposed to be Dolph Lundgren, basically. It just is like this enormous mountain of a man.
Yeah.
And I was like, it kind of worked in the movie, though, because you look at Tom Cruise and he'd be like, well, whatever. Like, anybody who's a big fella probably could think they could take Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
And that ended up being one of the great strengths of the movie. He was a little guy, but he was just dismantling, a whole room of guys. So it ended up working out really well.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of the same thing. Like,
yeah. It's it's not, the traditional Jesse Custer might not be expected of Dominic Cooper. So that might be kind of a fun transition, or...
Yeah, he's not what he seems,
yeah.
Which is cool, because I think that that might end up playing to the way a lot of characters react to him. He looks like a relatively small, soft-spoken kind of pretty boy preacher, and you'd be like, whatever's this guy? Who cares?
Yeah.
And then he'll beat you up and 6 of your friends and snap your arm with his bare hands.
All right. Well, we're getting near the end of the episode. I kind of want to end every episode, or kind of the last segment of the episode before the outro, to be kind of questions that we have or that were raised during this episode, or maybe answered at some point too when they start getting answered. I wrote these down. Jesse clearly has some power, very literally tell people what to do. How is he going to use it in the future? That's kind of a big question. Tulip is clearly into some kind of crazy work, and it appears Jesse used to help her or work with her. Is she going to pull him into it again, and will he use her talents for something in his town or whatever? We'll see. Who were the men looking for the celestial body or the ghost type thing, the energy, following the energy around? That's something that we might get more on next week. Who killed Jesse's father and why? That seems like it might be important. And then the other, if I'm reading correctly, and then finally, the only other question I had is, how did Arseface get that way?
Oh yeah, that's great.
So
I didn't even realize they didn't even get into that.
Yeah, so those are the questions that I got out of this episode. I'm sure they'll raise some more, and they'll start answering some of them too. Yeah, so. This was the first episode of Gone to Texas. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As I said at the beginning of the show, you can reach us by email, g2tfeedback@gmail.com. That's the letter G, number 2, letter T, feedback@gmail.com. G2tpodcast.com has all of our episodes on it. And you can reach us on Twitter at G2tpodcast as well. Nick and I are from the Midwest Film Nerds podcast. You can check that out at midwestfilmnerds.com. I am also on the Midwest Game Nerds podcast, which is at MidwestGameNerds.com. If you want to hear us talk about movies and film news and other film reviews and things like that, go check out the Midwest Film Nerds. If you want to hear me and some other people talk about video games, check out the Midwest Game Nerds. The next episode of Preacher is airing on June 5th, so look for our next episode sometime that week.
It's a bummer we have to wait that long.
Yeah, we got to wait 2 weeks. I think they wanted the Fear the Walking Dead lead in, so they put the first episode after the mid-season finale of Fear the Walking Dead. And then now they want to go back and kind of show it again.
I love that it's airing on Sundays. That's great.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good.
That's good.
There's got to be a poster with a tagline that says "Go to church on Sunday" or something like that.
I can't wait to read all the
religious
outrage.
backlash.
Oh yeah, I know there already has been some.
Yeah.
So they played it a lot safer in that regard, I think, than they necessarily needed to. So that's interesting.
It might.
It's gonna go.
Crazier.
It's gonna go
Yeah.
way out there. Yeah. I'm excited to see what happens.
All right. Yeah. So I'll use our film lead sign off. Kyle XY, go watch some Preacher.
There you go.